Hey parents, Carmine here with your video review of Mad Max. The Mad Max video game is an eye-candy heavy hybrid of the Road Warrior and Fury Road. Its open-world environments and top-notch vehicular combat provide a beautiful and entertaining experience for those who don't mind a decent amount of repetition. Despite the game's short campaign, there are dozens of hours of gameplay contained within an expansive, post-apocalyptic Australian wasteland. If you're into huge explosions and powerful cars with ridiculous weaponry, this is your kind of open-world game. Violence is by far the most obvious factor in this game. The opening cutscene might give the impression that this is going to be a violent gore fest, but in reality most of the violence is fairly mild. The majority of the player's time will be spent behind the wheel of the magnum opus, Max's car. Frequently, the player will engage in vehicular combat. This may involve lots of sparks and bright explosions, but blood is mostly absent from this type of combat. The only time when blood is obvious in vehicle combat is when an enemy tries to board the magnum opus, but hits the car's spikes instead. But there are times when Max will have to leave his vehicle and fight enemies on foot. Most of the time this involves engaging in a dance of punches and parries, which sometimes results in minor blood, but nothing significant. Stabbing an enemy with a shiv or performing a finishing attack on a boss will result in more noticeable blood, but these were relatively uncommon for me since shivs were more rare than ammunition, and bosses were even more rare than that. There were only two times when gore became a factor. The first is in the opening cutscene. As I mentioned before, it's a very graphic scene, but is a stark contrast to the rest of the game. Max gets in a fight with Lord Scrotus, the story's main antagonist, and ends up driving a chainsaw through Scrotus' head. There's a substantial amount of blood, but somehow Lord Scrotus ends up surviving the event. The other time when gore is present is when an enemy on foot gets too close to an explosion. If the player uses a fuel tank or something similar to cause the explosion, the bits can often be lost in the large, bright flames. But if the player uses a thunderpoon, which is an explosive-tipped javelin, the resulting gore will be very obvious. Overall, gore is impossible to miss, but relatively rare compared to the rest of the content. Sexuality and substances are so minor they're barely worth mentioning. A few characters will taunt Max right before a fight by saying that they'll pleasure themselves with his decapitated head. One of the female characters is described as a concubine, though it never goes any farther than that. And one character who makes a brief appearance is seriously addicted to some sort of inhalant, but that's pretty much it for both categories. What isn't technically a substance, but I feel compelled to mention, is the food that Max can eat to gain health. The normal foods are dead rats, lizards, birds, and cans of dog food, but the player can also have Max eat the maggots out of a human corpse. It's absolutely mortifying to me, no pun intended, but Max eats the maggots without any sign of squeamishness. Due to the level of violence, in particular the opening cutscene and gore, but lack of other mature content, we gave this game a recommended age of 16 years old. For the full written review, including the extra categories, log on to SideStoryGames.com.